So President Trump called out Gavin Newsom's failed leadership for this whole LA riot, and the left is still blaming ICE. Y'all like the video right here? And check this out.
You know, you've got this back and forth, and you have one person, Newsom, who's tried to make this entirely about President Trump. And interesting, on the heels of President Trump laying out a policy intended to help the people of Governor Gavin Newsom's state on the issue of wildfires.
Yeah, and look, part of what we learned during this really informative presser was that, first of all, our disaster funding right now is flush and funded. $13 billion. We are ready for this season. That was even before the hurricane comments. This was about wildland fires specifically. And to learn that we are burning more timber than harvesting, that for every dollar that we reap from harvesting, we are spending $100 either on woefully inadequate fire prevention or in those losses. You know, for me as a Californian, who I have so many friends that are still out of their homes in the LA fires, like we've talked about, fighting with insurance adjusters, flying in, going in all the time, hours on the phone, trying to get funding. That's Governor Gavin Newsom's watch. I have friends from Northern California that are still absolutely decimated from the prior fires. To accept this as somehow a way of life, a seasonal existence, blaming it on climate change, but ignoring the human element of mismanagement, just such incompetence. And to have this governor continue to make it all about Trump and continue to make it all about his attention-seeking tweets and his sound bites is so infuriating to me. The people that have lost their lives in those fires, the people that continue to struggle under his watch while he looks in the mirror and pats himself on the back is just absolutely unacceptable. And I hope moving forward that in the weaning away from FEMA and in the weaning away from these incompetent governors, we're going to see who separates from the wheat from the chaff, who can't handle actual gubernatorial existence in their government and their governance of these states, because I think it's pretty clear that Gavin Newsom can't cut it.
Well, here he is. We do have his characterization of the call. Listen to this.
Have you spoken in the last couple of days to the president about any of this?
Yeah, we talked for almost 20 minutes, and this issue never came up. I kept trying to talk about L.A. He wanted to talk about all these other issues. We had a very decent conversation.
When was this?
This was late Friday night, I think about 1:30 plus his time.
After the protests had started?
After the protests, and he never once brought up the National Guard. He's a stone-cold liar. He said he did. Stone-cold liar. Never did.
Harsher words for Trump than the protests. We also, that was the Friday call. There could have been another call since then. I just want to point that out. But he has harsher words for President Trump than he does for the rioters.
Well, I think a big part of this, though, is that this is very embarrassing for Gavin Newsom, and it's after a string of embarrassments. You look at all these different Democrat policies that are under dispute nationally, and they're best epitomized in California, whether it's how to handle a homeless population. Do you encourage it or do you discourage it? California encourages it, and they deal with all of that. All of their horrible wildfire preparation. You know, they get a lot of Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom get a lot of criticism for how they responded to that fire. But really, the bigger criticism is how they failed to prepare for that fire. And then you look at all of the riots, the cartel riots, and what they're doing to encourage cartel activity in California. You know, California is a state where you basically can only afford to live there if you're extremely wealthy or if you're illegal. And they've kind of hollowed out the middle class. So when people look at what they don't like about Democrat policies, they look at California and they think Gavin Newsom, and that scares him heading into a primary.
You know, Brian, and I would just say, having listened to President Trump make many phone calls to many different governors, world leaders, President Trump's not a wallflower. He's not someone who sits there as the city burns and just doesn't speak up.
He's going to do it. And like I said, I think that he really adjusted from the first term. He said, I held back. A lot of people consulted him to let Minneapolis handle Minneapolis, let Seattle and Portland handle it. And this time he's like, no, we're not going to do it. He's also sending a message to Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia, all these others that, yeah, you might. And by the way, I hear there might be heating something. If they're heating something up for this weekend, that we're going to come down. We're going to come down hard. And if you have a police force, I like what Eric Adams said yesterday. He said, don't think it just New York is going to tolerate what's happening in Los Angeles.
100%.
Yep. And President Trump made clear today, if there was an interruption, I would invoke the Insurrection Act. I believe that was the first question. That was his response. So word of warning out of this weekend.
Yeah.